October 27, 1962. A Soviet submarine is trapped beneath the Caribbean. Above it, American destroyers drop warning depth charges, not to destroy it, just to force it to surface. But the men inside don't know that. The air is hot, the batteries are dying, communication with Moscow is gone, and somewhere in the dark, a Soviet officer gives the order, "Prepare the nuclear torpedo." In our timeline, one man stopped it. In this timeline, he doesn't. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the closest humanity ever came to nuclear war. For 13 days, the United States and Soviet Union stared each other down over nuclear missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. In real life, diplomacy won by a thread. But alternate history is built on threads snapping. So what happens if the Cuban Missile Crisis goes wrong? Act 1. The Spark. The first explosion happens at sea. The Soviet submarine B-59, believing war has already begun, launches its nuclear torpedo at the American fleet, enforcing the blockade around Cuba. A blinding flash tears across the water. An American destroyer vanishes. For Washington, there is no confusion. A nuclear weapon has just been used against the United States Navy. President Kennedy is rushed into emergency meetings. The room is divided. Some advisors demand restraint. Others argue that hesitation means weakness. The Joint Chiefs push for airstrikes against Soviet missile sites in Cuba before they can launch. Kennedy hesitates. Then the reports arrive. Soviet missile crews in Cuba are moving. No one knows whether they're preparing to fire or preparing to hide. That uncertainty becomes the deadliest force on Earth. Kennedy authorizes limited airstrikes. Limited. That word will not survive the day. Act 2. Cuba burns. At dawn, American bombers scream over Cuba. They strike airfields, missile sites, radar stations, and command posts. But the Americans don't know everything. Some Soviet tactical nuclear weapons in Cuba are still operational. Their commanders have been cut off from Moscow, watching American planes destroy their positions. They believe the invasion has begun, so they use what they have. A nuclear blast erupts over Guantanamo Bay. Thousands of American troops are killed. Now there is no limited anything. The United States launches a full invasion of Cuba. Marines hit the beaches. Paratroopers drop inland. Naval guns pound the coast. Havana becomes a battlefield. Fidel Castro, who in real life urged Khrushchev to consider nuclear war if Cuba was invaded, now watches his island become the front line of World War III. To Cuba, this is not strategy. It is apocalypse. Act 3. The world catches fire. Moscow receives fragmented reports. Soviet forces destroyed. Cuba invaded. Nuclear weapons used. American troops advancing. Nikita Khrushchev faces the nightmare every Cold War leader feared. If he does nothing, the Soviet Union looks humiliated. If he responds, the world may end. He chooses response. Soviet missiles hit American bases in Turkey and Italy. The United States retaliates against Soviet military targets in Eastern Europe. NATO goes to full alert. Warsaw Pact forces move toward West Germany. Berlin, already a divided city, becomes a fuse. A nervous Soviet commander mistakes NATO movements for an invasion. Artillery opens fire. American tanks respond. The Cold War is no longer cold. It is steel, fire, and panic. Act 4. The Exchange. The first intercontinental missiles launch after midnight. Not all of them work. Early nuclear arsenals are terrifying, but imperfect. Some missiles fail in their silos. Some miss their targets. Some crews never receive orders because command networks are collapsing. But enough get through. Washington is hit. Moscow is hit. New York, Leningrad, Chicago, Kiev, Norfolk, and military bases across both continents disappear beneath mushroom clouds. Millions die in the first hours. Millions more survive the blasts only to face burns, radiation, hunger, and a sky turning gray. The United States government relocates inland. The Soviet leadership fractures between surviving military commands. Nobody wins. There is no victory speech, no surrender ceremony, only static. Act 5. The Broken Century. By 1963, the war is over because the countries fighting it are too shattered to continue. Cuba is devastated. Much of Florida is abandoned. Europe is split into radioactive zones, refugee corridors, and military occupations that barely function. China, spared the worst, emerges as one of the largest surviving powers, but even it faces famine from collapsing global trade and a damaged climate. The United Nations becomes a relief organization more than a political body. The space race ends. The civil rights movement in America is delayed and transformed by martial law, displacement, and national trauma. Decolonization across Africa and Asia still happens, but in a poorer, harsher world, where superpower aid has vanished and nuclear fallout shapes politics for generations. By the 1980s, there is no internet boom, no moon landing legacy, no globalized economy as we know it. Instead, children grow up learning evacuation routes the way we learned multiplication tables. History books call it the October War, but survivors call it something simpler: the week the sun went out. The terrifying part of the Cuban Missile Crisis isn't that leaders wanted the world to end, it's that they almost stumbled into it. A submarine crew without communication, a president under pressure, a missile site misread from the sky, a warning shot mistaken for an attack. History didn't survive 1962 because the system worked perfectly. It survived because, at the right moments, a few people chose not to push the final button. And in this timeline, that was all it took to lose everything. And that's how one wrong move in 1962 could have changed the world forever. If you enjoyed this alternate history scenario, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more What If history videos. What alternate timeline should we explore next?